Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Stories and Scones. My name is Kara Nelson, and I'm on our communications team. I am pinch hitting this morning. Pastor Christy and Pastor Bill are out on some PTO, but Pastor Christy has recorded her story for us today, so that's going to play here on the screen in just a second. It's a little bit longer, so the prayers for today were actually said yesterday. So when Christy's video wraps up, just go ahead and leave. I won't come back and dismiss you. So thanks so much for coming. Grab a scone if you haven't, and enjoy the rest of your day after Pastor Christy's video.
Hello, everyone. I've got my latte. Hope you've got a cup of coffee and a scone or maybe another baked good. And get comfortable for a little story. In May of 2016, my husband John and I were heading into a major transition time in our home and careers. We were finishing up our year in Bozeman, Montana, where John had completed or was completing his required internship for seminary, and I, meanwhile, was completing my highly successful one-year career as a barista in downtown Bozeman. Thus, my love for lattes. Come June, we would finally both be fully finished with our seminary degrees, and at least on paper, we would be ready to begin our careers as pastors. We had submitted our required paperwork to our larger denomination, requesting that the church send us to Alaska or somewhere in the Pacific Northwest to keep up our pattern of adventures. Alas, as of May, we were early into an interview process with a parish that I assure you would have stretched the definition of adventure. The interview process was not going terribly well, and in any case, we had learned that even if it all came through, the positions there were not available until the fall. And so there we were in May, soon to be booted out of our home, which was connected to the internship. We had no jobs on the horizon for a few months, and so naturally, we booked flights to Spain to do some walking, quite a bit of walking, in fact. We were going to walk the Camino de Santiago. We had heard about the Camino from some dear friends of ours who had walked the final segment a few times. It's a historic, the Camino is a historic Roman Catholic pilgrimage to the cathedral in Santiago, Spain, which, as you can see in this map here, is the place where all of these routes converge. The cathedral in Santiago is said to be the forever resting place of the remains of St. James. So here's what we knew about the Camino. We knew that the most popular route started in France. The most popular route on this map you can see here is the yellow one, not the orange one, the yellow one. And we knew that that most popular route started in France, went through the Pyrenees, and ended in Santiago. We knew the trail, that yellow trail, was about 500 miles long. We knew that all along the way on that trail, because it's the most popular one, there were hostels. And so most importantly for that season of our life, we knew that this seemed to be a decently affordable way to spend a solid several weeks in Europe, since there were options for hostels. And that was about it. We didn't know where to fly into, what sort of terrain we would face on the Camino, or what gear we would need. We didn't know how long it would take us to walk 500 miles. So it was pretty risky and, quite frankly, a bit stupid to book round trip flights to Spain, since we had no idea what kind of pace we would hold, how long it would take. But with a few sort of rudimentary calculations, that's what we did. We booked round trip flights to Spain. Our outgoing journey started on the 4th of July, so almost exactly 5 years ago. We packed our bags, said goodbye to our dog, and flew out from Minneapolis. By the time we got to our gate at MSP, I had already forgotten my water bottle in security. So immediately we purchased a couple of plastic water bottles that then became our secondary hydration sources behind our Camelbacks for the next 6 weeks. So we got to know those plastic airport water bottles pretty well. After a layover in Montreal, we landed in Madrid, Spain early in the morning. And from Madrid, from the airport, I had booked us on a bus to Pamplona. And from Pamplona, I think it was like another bus or two, maybe a train. It's all kind of blurry, and it was even at the time because we were jet lagged. But in any case, the journey finally landed us in a little French town called Saint-Jean, a border town just barely into France, truly barely, like we were out of it in a couple miles on our first day of the walk. We had no place booked in Saint-Jean, but our guidebook assured us there would be several options for lodging. Now, as I went through that journey from the Madrid airport to Saint-Jean, perhaps for a few of you, the town named Pamplona rang a couple bells. For us, it did not. When we got onto the bus at the Madrid airport bound for Pamplona, our fellow travelers seemed just like everyone else in the Madrid airport. Nothing was terribly noteworthy about them. But by the time we got off the bus to Pamplona, our fellow passengers on the bus had magically all changed into white shirts with red bandanas. The costume change seemed curious, but I was too tired to notice much. We had a couple hours to burn in Pamplona, so we set up shop at a park, hung out, I think took a nap or two, and then made note of many other tourists with the white shirt, red bandana look. There seemed to be some sort of unspoken dress code in this mystery city, but again, we were too tired to take much note of it. It was only several days later when we were walking into Pamplona that we understood the costumes. We had booked our Camino during the annual Running of the Bulls festival. And the heart of the festival was in Pamplona. The route of the Camino took us through the heart of the city itself. I'm pleased to report there were no actual bulls walking with us as fellow pilgrims through the city of Pamplona, but let me tell you, the after party of the Running of the Bulls, which is a daily event, and it had happened that morning, the after party was raging. So just imagine Spaniards living their best life on the streets of Pamplona with vendors and music and spirits to be sure, everywhere you look. And then here are two ignorant Americans with our floppy hats and our hiking poles, just click, click, clicking through the streets, keeping an eye on our yellow arrows, which are the guides for Camino pilgrims all along the way. It was day 3 or 4 of our walk by then. And by the time we reached Pamplona, we had already logged several miles that day. But because of the festival, there was nowhere to stay in the city, and truly we would not have wanted to stay there anyway because the party was raging all night long and we wanted some peace and quiet. Our guidebooks told us there was a smaller town a couple miles outside of the city, and so we decided on that spot for our destination. Finally, we arrived there at a hostel, which was a converted convent, and it was swarming with other Camino pilgrims. The hostel operator seemed to be feeling pretty saucy that day, and she kept publicly humiliating us about doing our laundry outside. So eventually she broke us down so much that we grabbed our bags and kept on walking. It had been a very long day, but again, we desperately wanted some peace and quiet. So we walked for more miles. Finally, we fully escaped the Pamplona metro area and walked walked again and again beside some peaceful and lovely Spanish windmills. At long last, I really don't even know how many miles were under us that day. By this point, we reached another town, and to call it a town is stretching the definition of town. We knew that this small collection of buildings was our last chance at lodging for the night. It was getting dark, and we had long exceeded our physical limit. So if nothing was going to work out there, we probably would have just slept on a sidewalk or something. There were 2 hostels in this town, and one of them was completely closed. So we waltzed into the other one, our last vestige of hope, and greeted the manager with desperation. Dos camas, por favor. We said to the man, 2 beds. He shook his head. Una cama. He had only 1 bed. I'll have you know at this point, John had like a couple years of Spanish in middle school, and I have a French minor, so neither of us was helpful in this exchange here. CCC, we said to him, we tried to imply, we'll take it. We'll take the 1 bed. There was more of an exchange. He was trying to turn us away because he didn't think he had proper accommodations for us. And we kept saying, esposos, like we're married. It's fine. We don't have standards. We'll take your bed. And eventually he took pity on us and escorted us to our upstairs bed, singular. And thus began the night when John and I shared a top bunk in a Spanish hostel in a room with about 10 other people. I truly cannot imagine what the person on the bottom bunk thought when we both climbed up there, but she snored most of the night, so I think she was fine. Several weeks later along the trail, we were sharing Camino horror stories with a fellow pilgrim from Austria. We told her about the night we shared a top bunk outside of Pamplona, and she said, "That was you?" The rumor apparently had spread among Camino pilgrims about the 2 idiot Americans who shared a top bunk and didn't know about the running of the bulls and that it was really hard to find a place to stay around Pamplona. And there we were. In the short weeks leading up to the Camino, back in the States when we were preparing, I had set up a blog for us to chronicle the journey. Here it is. Believe it or not, it's still available on the internet. Oh dear, you can see the address. I didn't really think about that. Whoops. So there you go. You can go check it out if you want. It's still up. So in these weeks leading up to the journey, we had humble bragged to our friends and family that we were setting out on this lifetime adventure. I had visions for this blog of writing prolific posts about our journey, insights I would share about global citizenship, insights that would surely conjure tears of inspiration to our loyal fan base. I wasn't for sure expecting to land a book deal out of this blog, but I wasn't ready to rule it out either. Well, I'll tell you, in the real adventure, the blog lasted for about 3 days. We later learned that a few people were sort of regularly asking our parents if we were okay because there was radio silence on the blog. We did manage to get on Wi-Fi enough to update our parents and at least tell them that we were fine. But mostly we didn't want to share the real story with our loyal fan base. Just as I was preparing to share this story, I dug through some old emails from the Camino, and I found one I had written to my best friend from Burgos, which I think was day 11 or so of our trip. And I wrote this to her. "We are in Burgos tonight. Population just bigger than Sioux Falls, but feels huge. The population density in Spanish cities generally feels a lot different. We've been doing well overall, but today was tough for me. I felt totally worn out and still had to walk 12-ish miles as always. And the reality is starting to hit that we'll still be doing this for another 22 days. Ufta. Tonight we got a hotel. It's at least nice to have our own space away from the chaos of the hostels. We got Domino's and frozen yogurt for dinner, which helped with some homesickness. Hoping to hit a better rhythm tomorrow. It will probably help to get out of the city. The villages seem to be a lot friendlier and more peaceful. In cities, we feel just absurdly out of place walking around with our packs. 5 years later, I still quite don't have an answer when people ask me what it was like to walk the Camino. Without a doubt, it was a life-changing experience. About 5 months ago, John and I moved into our third property in Sioux Falls, and every one has been smaller than the previous one. We've been on a years-long mission, a 5-year-long mission, in fact, to minimize our possessions and our living space. And that definitely traces back to our Camino when we lived out of packs for 6 weeks. So on the left on these pictures, you can see us at the Cruz de Ferro, which is a big landmark on the Camino, where you are invited to bring a rock from home to represent sort of the burdens you carry, and you leave it there. So we did, it's like a couple 100 miles into the Camino at least, and we left rocks there. There in the middle, you can barely see, we're at the 0 kilometer marker in Finisterre on the ocean in Spain. And then on the right, I'm throwing away my shoes. In my previous call as a pastor, I told stories from the Camino so many times that eventually I imposed a quarterly limit on myself for Camino sermon illustrations. When you walk 530 miles, you've got a lot of stories to tell and a lot of potential directions to take with the stories. But for the purposes of this forum, this Stories and Scones time of telling the story of the Camino, my mind landed on a frequent conversation we had in Spain. When you meet fellow pilgrims along the Camino, it's standard, as is human practice to do. It's standard to introduce yourself and to say where you're from. If the conversation lasts a few minutes longer, you likely venture into traditional career turf. You ask each other, what do you do for a living back at home? And for us, then, at that point, we would have to inevitably tell the story that we were recent seminary graduates, and usually you have to explain what seminary means. So, in other words, we were soon to be pastors back in the States. And when you say you're a pastor, it's generally a great way to end a conversation. And so when in those conversations our secret identities as pastors were revealed, we would often get asked, oh, so are you doing the Camino for religious reasons? Because you see, while the Camino was originally a Roman Catholic pilgrimage, today it draws people from all over the world, most of whom I would say do not identify as religious or spiritual. They do the Camino for the cultural experience or the personal journey, or some combination of the above. What struck me about the question on whether we were doing the Camino for religious reasons was the assumption behind that question that it would somehow look different to do the Camino for religious reasons than it would for any other motivations. It seemed like there was the implication that there was like a separate trail, a righteous trail for the mystics and the contemplatives. And there were different hostels where people pray and contemplate and don't smell as bad as everyone else. But there were no such things. We were walking the Camino for the same reason as everyone else. It was hard work, and it became physically therapeutic for us to walk through what was a really difficult and uncertain season of our life. During the Camino, our one job prospect, which already wasn't great, fully fell apart. So we had truly no idea what we would be coming home to, where we would go home to when our walk ended. We had no specific place to call home When people asked us where we were from within the States, we didn't even know what to say. We had just come from Montana, but we knew we wouldn't be going back there. The Camino was a life-changing experience to us. It was a gift. At a time when our homes and identities were entirely in flux, we found a home on the trail among pilgrims who were in similar nebulous territory. And the daily walking gave us a rhythm and a routine. It truly became our daily work, our jobs to walk. Even though I was a fresh seminary grad, quite honestly, my faith was at a low point during the Camino, if that is, you define faith in the overt sense of the word. Every morning, John and I said Martin Luther's morning prayer during our first few steps on the trail. And then John would always say a Hail Mary on behalf of a couple of Lutherans. And that was the extent of our prayer life. We never stopped for long stretches of meditation. That was it. And yet, I have no doubt that God was at work over those 6 weeks. God transformed our steps into prayers and our conversations into community. God gave us a moving home and the simple task of walking when we didn't have homes or vocational identities to claim. And so in the same way, this kind of gets at my hope for this Stories and Scones gathering time and space. We all have stories and journeys that shape us. They might not sound or feel overly religious to us or feel especially faith-based at the time or even as we look back on them, but that does not mean that God is not profoundly at work through those stories. The book of Ruth is one of my favorite books in the Bible. It's a story of a pilgrimage, a difficult family journey in the middle of a famine, and not once in the entire book does the writer mention God. The same is true of the book of Esther, another favorite book. And yet somehow, mysteriously and beautifully, these books landed in the Bible, in our sacred text, because they still profoundly illustrate the ways God is at work in the world. And so my prayer for you today is that you see and feel and know somehow mysteriously that God is at work in your story, even if that does not seem true, even if it maybe never has, it is. And so I'll close now out of Martin Luther's Small Catechism with his morning prayer, which guided our first steps every morning on the Camino. I give thanks to you, Heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have protected me through the night from all harm and danger. I ask that you would protect me this day also from sin and all evil, so that my life and actions may please you. Into your hands I commend myself, my body, my soul, and all that is mine. Let your holy angel be with me, so that the wicked foe may have no power over me. Amen.